Hello everyone, welcome back. I hope you are all doing great. This time we will be going over various ramp cards for Mono Red. Note that I am excluding all CEDH fast ramp pieces. I'm only including the ramp pieces that I believe are accepted as casual. I hope that by watching this you will be able to tune up your ramp game and perhaps even find interesting ramp pieces you have not considered before. So let's do this! So first we have a card that probably doesn't need much introduction. It's a card that everyone knows. It's Sol Ring. Sol Ring is a colorless artifact. It costs 1 colorless to cast. It has tap, add 2 colorless to your mana pool. Yeah, not much to say here. It makes more mana than it costs. So Sol Ring is probably the best quote-unquote casual ramp piece. How is this broken thing casual and accepted as so? I don't really get it. There might be a few handful decks that might not want this, but otherwise this is usually a very easy auto-include, and it also ruins games. And because of that, yes, I would absolutely turn 1 Force of Vigor my opponent's Sol Ring plus Lightning Greaves. Enough said, it's an absolute S tier. Let's move on. So next we have Wayfarer's Bauble. Wayfarer's Bauble costs 1 colorless, is a colorless artifact. It has pay 2, tap, sacrifice Wayfarer's Bauble, search your library for a basic land card, put that card into battlefield tapped, then shuffle. I feel like this card has quite varying reputation within the EDH community. Some swear by it, and some tend to avoid it more often than not. So let's break this down a bit. So in your opening hand, playing this kind of locks you out on your first turn in order to drop this. Then it becomes a 2 mana ramp with the land coming into play tap. So it's actually pretty slow. And it completely takes away your first and second turn. Now what about on later turns? On later turns this might be a bit better. It becomes a 3 mana ramp piece. For which you can kind of split out the cost into 1 mana on one turn and 2 mana on another turn. So, yeah, I think it can do work in budget, but in general, I'm not really a big fan of it. I'm gonna rank it as D+ here. Next, we have Arcane Signet. It's an artifact that costs 2, and it taps to add 1 mana of any color in your commander's color identity. So it's a pretty standard 2 CMC colored ramp with no downside at all. We only need red, but hey, it doesn't matter. So it's really solid. So I'll put it in a B tier. It's just solid, unconditional 2 CMC ramp. Next we have Fire Diamond. Fire Diamond is an artifact that costs 2. It comes into battlefield tapped, and it has tap to add 1 red mana. So this is kind of like an Arcane Signet, which only makes red, which is okay, because that's all we care about. But it comes into play tapped? Nah, why? So I think this is somewhere in the C tier, just slightly above Wayfarer's Bauble. While this doesn't require the 1 mana upfront cost that Wayfarer has, it is more prone to suffer from some random collateral artifact destruction, so I think C is fair. So next we have a bunch of 2 CMC colorless mana rocks. These have pretty good standard cost to mana production ratio, but they only produce colorless mana, which in monocolor is much more forgivable. So just on that alone, these are actually pretty solid. So first we have Mind Stone. Mind Stone is an artifact that costs 2. It has tap to add 1 colorless to your mana pool. And it has 1, pay 1, tap, sacrifice Mind Stone to draw a card. So, you'll get the option to trade this in for a card late game, which is okay. Not too exciting. I think where you want to seriously consider this is when you have a way to recur it. But hey, I wonder what monocolor is pretty good at doing that. So, just by itself, without synergy, I would put it as a C tier. But when you have synergy built around it, I will probably put this as a B. Next, we have Thought Vessel. It's an artifact that costs 2. It has tap to add 1 colorless, and It also has a static ability that says you have no maximum hand size. So mana-wise, it's similar to Mind Stone, but only if you care about having no limit to your hand size. Because we all know Mono Red is so good at drawing cards. In case you didn't notice, I'm being very sarcastic here. No, one of the 1,000 struggle Mono Red has is usually card draw. So more often than not, this is really not exciting at all. I'm gonna put it as a D+. So the last 2 CMC rock that makes colorless in this list is Liquid Metal Torque. Liquid Metal Torque costs 2, it's an artifact. It has tap to add 1 colorless. It also has tap, target non-land permanent becomes an artifact in addition to its other types until end of turn. So, this can open up some fun interaction and teamwork, most common being pairing it with an artifact removal. You'll want to consider this also if you have like an artifact heavy deck that can capitalize on turning things into artifact. One example I can think of on the top of my mind here is Bosch. You can turn any non-land permanent you have into an artifact and then Bosch can just fling it for damage. So, if you don't really have synergy around it, it's not so great. I think I'll give it a D+. But if you do have synergy with it, I will probably put it as high as a C. Next we have Sword of the Animus. Sword of the Animus costs 2. It's a legendary artifact equipment. It has equipped creature gets +1/+1. Whenever equipped creature attacks, you may search your library for a basic land card, put it onto the battlefield, tap, then shuffle. And its equip cost is 2. So, I feel this is always a solid ramp piece that is repeatable. It has a very generous condition. It triggers on attack, so you don't even need to connect with a player to trigger the ramp. And the +1/+1 is often very relevant at the beginning, since it often makes your creature be the biggest one on the field, or at least big enough to kind of not making other people block you, which means you can attack safely and get the trigger. The downside, of course, is the equip cost for 2. So this is not exactly the fastest on-demand ramp. And also the land comes into play tap, so this adds to the slowness. But on casual battlecruiser games, which are slower, this will net you so many lands. So many. Like if it stays and you can net a land every turn, you just net an extra land every turn, which is amazing. And one thing that will make this very, very reliable is if your deck has a lot of creatures. Or even better, if your commander is relatively low costed and has some form of evasion. So you can reliably in the early game get in with this and start accumulating land ramps. So I'm gonna give this a solid B+. So next we have Sword of the Animus Bursty Twin. It's Dowsing Dagger. Dowsing Dagger is an artifact equipment. It costs 2. And it says when Dowsing Dagger enters the battlefield, target opponent creates 2/0/2 green plant creature tokens with Defender. And it also has equipped creature gets +2/+1. And the important part, whenever equipped creature deals combat damage to a player, you may transform Dowsing Dagger. And it has an equip cost of 2. And when it transforms, it becomes Lost Veil, which is a land. And it has tap to add 3 mana of any one color to your mana pool. So, immediately the downside here is that you need to connect with a player to trigger it. So, a little bit less ideal than Sword of the Animus. And you'll also give away plants when it comes into play. But 0/2 plants, more often than not, have very, very small impact on the game. On the upside though, it gives +2/+1 to the equipped creature, which makes it easier to, or more reliably, get that combat damage in. And while connecting with a player is harder than just an attack trigger, you only need to do it once in order to trigger the ability and flip it into the land. And even better, once you flip it, you can immediately use it. It's like a sudden 3 mana ritual that is repeatable the next turn. So it's always amazing when it happens. Like, suddenly you'll just be able to drop all those fatties way ahead of the curve. And similar to Sword of the Animus, having cheap creatures or commander with evasion allows you to trigger this as soon as possible reliably. So I'll put this in the A tier. I think the sudden burst of mana and like the momentum swing this provides make it just a small notch better compared to Sword of the Animus. Next, we have the big brother of Swords of the Animus and Dowsing Dagger. It's Sword of Hearth and Home. Sword of Hearth and Home is an artifact equipment that costs 3. It has equipped creature gets +2/+2 and has protection from greed and from white. It also has whenever equipped creature deals combat damage to a player, exile up to 1 target creature you own, then search your library for a basic land card. Put both cards onto the battlefield under your control, then shuffle. And it has an equip cost of 2. So, equip cost is still 2, but compared to the previous Sword of the Animus and Dowsing Dagger, it has a CMC of 3. However, this comes with some very appealing combat stats. It gives +2/+2 and protection from green and white. I found the protection to be extremely relevant for mono-red decks that plays creatures. The protections gives us evasion against big beefy green creatures and to some extent white creatures too, which oftentimes makes it really hard to go through to get that combat damage onto the player. Also, protection from white grants protection against some of the best spot removal in the format. Swords of Plowshare, Path to Exile, and so on. And unlike Swords of the Animus, this doesn't force the land to come into play tap, which is a really nice small mana burst. You can attack, fetch a land, then play a big spell even further down the curve right away. But wait, there's more. You don't just get a land, you also get an optional flicker trigger. So if you happen to have a creature with nice ETB that you can reuse and abuse, sweet, you can flicker it and get the ETB again. Have your entire deck revolve around ETB triggers? Oh, things can get nasty really quick. And one often small overlooked aspect of the flicker is that it targets a creature you own, not control, a creature you own, which means you can target creatures you own that are stolen by opponents to get it back to you after it flickers, which totally fits the theme and the flavor here. It is called the Sword of Hearth and Home. Now, the 3 CMC is the downside, of course, and like Dowsing Dagger, you'll need to connect your damage with a player to trigger the ability. But I would say it's a very fair cost for all the upsides. I'm gonna put this as a B+ tier. Next, we have Worn Power Stone. Worn Power Stone is an artifact that costs 3. Worn Power Stone enters the battlefield tapped, and it has tap to add 2 colorless mana. Very great rate. Colorless only, which is okay, depending on the deck. But because it comes into play tapped, it's slow. If all you care about is like hyper ramping as fast as possible to like a lot of mana, then sure, it will do its job. Otherwise, I'll probably avoid it. For example, I do play this in my Maelstrom Wanderer deck, which is not mono-red but relevant here for the example, because all it cares is ramping to 8 mana and cast Maelstrom Wanderer. So a 3-drop that nets 2 mana is great for that purpose. So in general, I think I rank it as like a D+, but if your deck is built with it, built for it or around it, then this could become a C+. Yeah. Next we have Curse Mirror, which is probably one of my favorite mana rock ever. Curse Mirror is an artifact that costs 2 and a red. It has tap to add a red mana. And it also has, as Curse Mirror enters the battlefield, you may have it become a copy of any creature on the battlefield until the end of the turn, except that it has haste. So, 3 CMC Mana Rock, typically not great, and I'd usually avoid them unless they bring something else that's really good to the table. And I think Cursed Mirror is one thing that brings such thing. I do feel like this card is somewhat underrated by the community. The ability to get a hasty copy of any creature on the board, not just your own, even only until the end of turn, is powerful. 3 things here. First, you get the ETB of the creature. Second, you get the attack trigger. And finally, which is oftentimes not so relevant, but since at the end of turn it does not actually die or leaves the battlefield, there are some interesting things that you can do with it. One of my favorite moments was when I was able to copy an opponent's Angel of Serenity, exiling 3 things permanently, since the leave the battlefield trigger will never trigger. So, in that sense, I would probably see this card more like as a copier first, Mana Rock second. And maybe I'm biased, but I'm going to rank this as a B tier. Next, we have another 3 CMC Mana Rock that I deem to be worthy. It's Strixhaven Stadium. Strixhaven Stadium is an artifact that costs 3. It has tap to add colorless, put a point counter on Strixhaven Stadium. Whenever a creature deals combat damage to you, remove a point counter from Strixhaven Stadium. Whenever a creature you control deals combat damage to an opponent, put a point counter on Strixhaven Stadium. Then, if it has 10 or more point counters on it, remove them all and that player loses the game. So, obviously, this only produces colorless, so even less exciting as a 3 CMC Mana Rock, but it brings to the table an alternative win condition. And it's a win con that generally works well with mono red decks that are creature oriented and wants to get in for damage. So, when you get to 10 counters, the player you deal combat damage to loses the game. And the beauty is that since you can choose the order of combat damage trigger, all you need is to hit that player with 1 creature to make them lose once you have those 10 counters. So, and it also gets counters just by tapping it for mana. So it's not crazy powerful, and opponents can counter it simply by dealing damage to you to remove the point counters from the artifact. So you do need to think carefully if and when you play this. But it's both fun, different, and it's a win con on a Mana Rock. So I think with that, I'm going to rank this as a B-. Next, we have Solemn Simulacrum. Solemn Simulacrum, our favorite set robot. It's an artifact creature of the type Golem. It costs 4. When Solemn Simulacrum enters the battlefield, you may search your library for a basic land card, put that card onto the battlefield tab, then shuffle. And when Solemn Simulacrum dies, you may draw a card. Oh, and it's a 2/2. So I did say it's our favorite set robot, but really it's never really been a favorite of mine. It's slow, I feel like. 4 mana, land comes into play tapped, and yes, the card draw is nice, but timing of when you can get the draw can get awkward. I'd probably only play it if I have artifact synergies that abuses recurring this over and over, and it can do well in that case because it's a creature, so it's way more easily recurable. And if it's for budget decks, yes, it's definitely playable. With that, I'm gonna rank it as a C tier. Next, we have Thran Dynamo. Thran Dynamo is an artifact that costs 4. It has tap to add 3 colorless mana. So if you care about having lots of mana and okay with it being colorless, then Thran Dynamo is the way to go. I don't think all decks need this. Again, One example I go to is my Maelstrom Wanderer deck that all it cares is ramping to 8, so ramping for 3 is amazing. Yeah, 4 CMC that produces 3, that's a amazing rate. So solid card, but not for all decks. Gonna rank it as a B-. Next we have Scepter of Eternal Glory. Scepter of Eternal Glory is a legendary artifact that costs 4. It has tap to add 1 mana of any color, and it also has tap to add 3 mana of any color. Activate only if you control 3 or more lands with the same name. So we recently got this from the new Warhammer 40k set. There's been a lot of debate, I think, how good this really is. My take is that this is really good for a monocolored deck that wants to ramp hard. It is more often than not a better Thran Dynamo. Of course, the caveat here is that you don't want to flood your deck with too many non-basics, so that's probably the trade-off. But a 4 CMC drop that can produce 3 colored mana, that's very strong. I'm gonna rank this as a B+. I was thinking of putting it even higher than that, but the fact that on the rare occasion you don't have your 3 basic lands, yeah, that probably will happen to me. And last we have Pyromancer's Goggles. It's a legendary artifact that costs 5. It has tap to add 1 red mana. When that mana is spent to cast a red instant or sorcery spell, copy that spell and you may choose new targets for the copy. So probably shouldn't belong in this list since its function is not exactly for ramping, but I guess it does ramp. So I haven't really played mono red spellslingers a whole lot, but I don't think I'm a fan of this one. The copy effect can be really strong, so for slow battlecruiser games this can definitely do a lot of work and a lot of fun, I imagine. However, it's way too slow for my taste. It's one of those cards where, let's say when someone pops off by the time you can actually play this, it can feel bad to have this in hand. Like, either you play this and they'll probably come hard after you play this, or you're forced to play other cards that have more immediate impact to deal with the threats, right? So, yeah. I'm not gonna even put a tier on this since I haven't actually played it myself, but I thought it's an interesting card to put out there. So there you have it. I hope this non-comprehensive list helps you optimize your ramp game for your mono red deck. I always feel that since mono red has so many limitations, optimizing the foundation of it, which includes ramp, is often more important than other decks that can get away with it. My favorites here from the list are probably Curse Mirror and Strixhaven Stadium. They're not just fun, but they can also have significant impact on top of just producing mana. So with that said, if you find videos like this useful, please consider liking and subscribing. It does help me determine whether I should make more videos like this or not in the future. Also, let me know what ramp you play in your mono red decks. What are your favorites? I love to hear about them. With that, I wish you an amazing day and happy deck brewing.